Hi everyone, Paulo here. Welcome to the channel where I make how-to videos. Time to share what I've learned, and I'm back with a Salesforce and a NextJS tutorial. In this video, we are going to learn how to integrate Salesforce with a NextJS app. We will be using a special JavaScript library called JSforce in our Next app. Formerly known as Node-Salesforce, is a isomorphic JavaScript library utilizing Salesforce API. It works both in the browser and in the backend with Node.js. Then we're going to use NextJS, which is a full stack React framework that handles both front end and back end. I'll cover the following in this video. We'll create a basic NextJS app that retrieves the accounts in our Salesforce org using the REST API. Then I'll cover the different JSforce authentication from SOAP API login to OAuth 2 flows. We'll look into the username password login flow and the web server flow. We'll also handle the callback and how to use cookies to save the access token, then read from the cookie and use the access token to make a call to the Salesforce resource. Also, we're going to troubleshoot some common issues along the way. If you're not familiar with how Salesforce authentication works, you could go ahead and check my previous video, how to use Postman to integrate to Salesforce with a connected app. It's a bit to cover. Let's go. So first, let's start with the app. So I'm going to create a new app called React Next app, latest YouTube SF Next app. We're going to accept all the defaults. Right, so let's open the project using Visual Studio Code. Right, so first off, let's install the package. So go to npm install, say JSforce. Check the package JSON. You can see the latest version of JSforce is installed. Next, let's run the app. So we're running it on port 3001. Make sure you take note of the port you're running your app on, because we'll use that information later. Okay, so this is the template. We're gonna remove this template and start from scratch. Okay. And Copilot, yep, there you go. Copilot suggested homepage, and we're gonna delete this. Right. So because we're using the app router, I'm just gonna quickly create a new folder called username password page, and autocomplete this. And this would be our first username login flow, name password page. Right, and from the main page here, I'm just gonna import the link from NextJS, and gonna open the link to username password. And let me resize this so I could see my app. Right, so when I click on this, I should jump into the username password page. So this is the first one that we're going to configure with the documentation here. So from documentation, you could use the SOAP API login. This code is written in Express, so it would work the same when we write this to the NextJS app. So here, I'm going to import the JSforce library, and we could use the same setup. So basically, I'll walk you through what this code is doing. So it's creating a new instance of this connection object and storing it on a con variable. Then it's an await function for that login, so we need to change this function to async. And right, so it requires a username and password. Normally you don't store the username password on the component, rather you create an environment file. Because I'm running on local, it's going to be env.local, and here we're going to specify the username and the password. So I'm going to grab my credentials for that developer edition org, and for the password, it needs to be the password appended with the security token. Take note of that, or else it won't work. Now here I'm going to replace this with the username. Similar here, process.env password with exclamation mark, because I know it's going to work. So after saving, you could immediately see that I am getting the user ID and the org ID, which is printed out here. So it's storing the user info, and then you could get that user info from that connection. Cool. So let's change this to retrieve our accounts instead. So I want to retrieve the accounts from our Salesforce org. So I'm going to remove this and remove this as well. Instead, we're going to create a query. Say const result. So autopilot is suggesting this one, limit 5, but I want it to limit to 15. So using that connection, we use a query and then specify the so-called query here, and then you get a result. So from the result here, just gonna quickly format this a little bit. There you go. So autopilot suggested loop on the results map, specify a key. So if we save this and go to our app, you can see it's now pulling all those accounts into my app in here. So I'm just gonna quickly put some Tailwind class in here, say list inside, and list what's called this, and plus list inside, so we can see those bullet points. Cool, so it's working. So this is how you would do it using that SOAP API login. If you want to do it with the OAuth flow, then you need to create a connected app and then grab the client ID, client secret, but still pass it the username and login. So let's do that. So I'm going here and I'm going to create a new file called username password flow page tsx. So this should be our username and password OAuth to flow. And I'm going back to my main page here, create a new link for that new page. Right, so if I go back, expected div, yep. So this would be our new OAuth 2 flow. So it's currently blank, so let's configure that. All right. So jump into Salesforce, go under the setup, then go under App Manager, and click on New Connected App. Give the connected app a name. I'm going to say YouTube SF Next App. Enter username, enter email. And then under here, enable OAuth settings. So it's going to ask for a callback URL. So because I'm developing this locally, so my callback URL is under localhost plus the port I was running on. And then I can define a callback URL, which we're not using for now. We'll use it later, but I already know what I want. So I'm going to say API auth2 callback. And then for the scope, normally you want for integration access to the ID, full access, and then to the API as well, and sometimes the web, and refresh token. So if you want to handle refresh token, you need to specify it on the scope. So for now, I'm not using proof key for code exchange. I'm just going to use web server flow and require secret for refresh token. I'm not even going to use that. But I'll click continue. Cool. So now we have the callback URL. We need to get the consumer key and consumer secret. So let's jump back to the document here and see what we need. So we need the client ID, client secret, plus the redirect URL. So I could copy the same details here. Jump to my user flow app here. Paste those information. Let's import the JSforce again. And here we need to specify the same process. And here client ID, client secret, we need to get that from the process as well. So I'm just gonna cheat here, copy this existing process that we have here, paste it here, and then I'm going and I need to change this to async, and then I need to go to my environment variable and I need to specify a client ID, client secret. So I say client ID, client secret. Yep, autopilot is suggesting this, redirect URI. Cool. So let's go back here to Salesforce. Let's grab the callback URL and let's grab the client ID, client secret. So this is going to ask for to verify. Okay, I'm going to copy the ID and copy the secret and save it like so. Go back to my flow and I'm going to exchange this process with the client ID. Same here, replace this with the client secret. Process env redirect URI. We don't need a code. Cool. All right. After saving, you can immediately see that the user ID and org ID are now being logged on the console here. So we could do the same that we did here, and I could just simply copy this information, jump back here, paste, and we actually don't need this. So it's basically doing the same. And if I jump to the app here, you would see we're now getting the accounts shown, but this time we're using a client ID, client secret to authenticate. So this works well, but now let's try one more method, which is using a web server flow. So I'm gonna create a new folder. I'm gonna call it web server flow page.tsx. All right, so this time this would be a little bit different. So we're gonna create a button that would redirect the user to the authorization URL. So let's create a button called handle login. So this is not asynchronous. And the URL would be an API router that we're gonna create. So auth to auth. Because this is a handle login, this would be a client component. Cool. So here I'm just gonna have a button login to Salesforce. Cool. And on our page here, I'm gonna create another link saying web server auth flow. So let's go back there, and here we have this button login to Salesforce. If I click on it, it will error out because we haven't defined that route yet. Cool. All right, so to do that, I'm going to create that route. So under my apps folder here, I'm going to say API auth2 and say auth /route.ts. So the way this works is we would go back here to the documentation here and go here under the auth2 flow. So this time we're importing the auth2 library from the JSforce. We're going to pass it the client ID, client secret, redirect URL, and then we need to get the authorization URL, and then we're going to redirect the browser so the user could log in with their credentials from Salesforce. And after that, they will be called back, redirected back to the callback URL, which we're going to handle afterwards. So let's build this. So first, let's import the JSforce from here. And I'm going to define this. This could be copied from our web server flow. Let's go here and copy that. So, all right. And because this is an API route, we need to import the next response from the next server, and we say export async function get, and from here we're gonna get, autopilot suggesting it, get the authorization URL, it needs a parameter of scope, and from the scope here we need to define API, ID, and web as the scope, similar to what we defined. I'm gonna return a next response and redirect them to the auth URL. So get authorization, I think URL is the right method. Yep, get authorization URL will return a URL, and then we would redirect that user when it hits this page. When they click on the button, they get redirected to that URL. So let's have a look how that looks like. So here, when I click on login, it would redirect me here with all those information passed on the header here. So I just need to log in with my details and hit login. All right, it's going to ask me to allow access. So the application is access for the identity URL, the web browser, and the API defined on the scope we provided. So when I hit allow, it's gonna redirect it back to the callback URL we specified. So the callback URL here needs to handle this code being passed from Salesforce. So to do that, we need to handle that callback. So I'm gonna create a new file here called under OAuth here. I'm gonna create a new file called callback /route.ts to create the folder and the file. Right. So for the callback to the documentation, we need to parse the access token. So the callback URL would pass the code. We need to use that code to get authorized, and after we get authorized, we will be able to see the access token, and then we would need to store that access token. Either you store that access token to a database or you store it in a cookie. In our case, we're going to store it in a cookie, right? So let's see what that access token looks like. So first, I'm going to import the auth2 and the connection from JSforce, and just going to quickly cheat in here and then walk you through it. So this is the same auth2. The login URL, we don't need the login URL here. And this is client ID, client secret. All right. Because this is API route, we also need to import the next response. All right. And under here, I'm going to say export async function get. But this time we have the requests. And we need to get the URL. So search params URL requests URL. And from there we need to check if it what are the parameters in the URL. So it could be an error or it could be a code. So if I jump back here, the parameter right now is code. So I could get this. If there was an error, that would be the error that we would get in the parameter here. Cool. So I'm just going to do an if statement here. If error, I'm going to return a next JSON, not a response, autopilot, but next response, and say JSON, and I'm going to clear this and return an object called error and say Salesforce auth error plus whatever error we got. And that's not new. Cool. So we got rid of that squiggly line. Now if code is not present, so let's see what autopilot said. No code provided. Yep. No authorization. Maybe not, let's say no authorization code found. Cool. But if we get a code, then we could do a try. So we could say con using the new connection. We're going to pass the same auth, and then we're going to do an await con authorize code. We're going to pass the code that we got, this code that we got, and then authorize ourselves. So if we get authorization back, that means we got a successful so if I do if we just do console log con here plus access token, I'm gonna do one without, one with. So I'm gonna say con access here. I'm gonna say before and after. And let's do a catch. So if there's any error, I wanted to return the error. Return response, Salesforce error. There's no message. Yeah, sometimes autopilot does that. Cool. So if you're trying to do the authorization and we got an error, this is the one we will get. All right. So if I go back here and I refresh, and let's see what error we got here. Error, no response is returned from API router. This is because I need to return a response here. If next response, nope. If it's successful, I want to do a redirect. to a new URL, which I'm gonna call /. So this could be a protected resource, so I'm gonna call it dashboard, and rec URL, update that URL. All right, save. Now no more squiggly lines. Okay, so I'm gonna refresh this. Yeah, so now we get an error. Salesforce auth error, invalid grant expired authorization code. So the code that we got just expired, so we might need to reauthorize ourselves again. But if I jump here, let's look at here. So before it's undefined, and because it tried to do on await authorize and we got an error, it jumped straight to the error here. So I'm going back here. I'm going one more step back here, and let's try to log in again. Your authorization of approval, unexpected errors occurred during authentication. Please try again. All right, so I might need to go one step back, and before we click on the login here, I'm going back to Salesforce here, and I'm just gonna make sure no OAuth session is active. So go search for session management, and I have a bunch of sessions here. I'm just gonna kill this session, this one, this OAuth 2 as well, and then hit remove. I think I have one more, so remove. All right, now if I just refresh here and hit login, as you can see, I got redirected to the dashboard here. If I jump to my log here, before it's the access token is undefined, and after the access token is defined, and then it returned an access token, and then it redirected me to the dashboard. Now I haven't defined app router page for the dashboard yet, so let's create one. So let's create here called dashboard /page tsx C. And what I want to do here is I want to import the JSforce, and I want to get the access token. So if I jump here to the documentation and just quickly go under here, access token. So you need the JSforce. You need to create a connection. You need the instance URL plus the access token. So on the log here, we got the access token from a successful authorization. We also need to get the instance URL so that we'll be able to create that connection. So let me copy this here, and we're gonna replace the instance URL with the access token. And I'm just gonna quickly cheat here and also do a query. Let's do this. Query, replace that, and change this to async. All right, so if I jump here, so this will work because it's an absolute URL. So let me, yep, it's complaining because of this. So how do we get the instance URL? So I need to go back to my callback here. On my callback, I'm going to use cookies. So I'm going to import the cookies from the NextJS. So import cookies, and I'm gonna quickly paste this code and explain what this is doing. So I no longer need that. I no longer need that as well. Cool. So what this is doing is we're setting the cookies with the name of Salesforce access token, and the value would be the connection access token, or it could be null, it could be blank. And then for the instance URL, we'll get that from the connection instance as well. So con.instance will have a value, and then it could be null as well. And then it has a max age and all the secure stuff if the node is production. So let me save that and then go to my dashboard here. And then basically what we need to do here is we need to import the cookies. Use the cookies. So I'm going to import cookies. I'm going to use the cons cookie store and say cookies, get the instance of the cookie, and then all right, so for the access token from the cookie store, get the name Salesforce access token, the one we defined on the callback, and whatever value is there. So I'm going to replace this with this. I'm going to replace this with this. Cool. And we need to do actually a try on this connection. So if there's an error, we want to be thrown an error if the session is not available. So try catch error, and we want to return a div. Yep, failed to fetch data from Salesforce. As you can see, this result is erroring out. There's a squiggly thing, so we need to put that and create this let variable result here. And that should, and I'm just gonna do a console log error, whatever the error would be. Cool. Right, so if I do this, it would fail because we haven't saved that cookie and we're trying to retrieve that cookie. Right, so to fix this, we just need to go back to the session management, kill that session, and then redo the authentication again. All right, and I'm gonna remove this, save. Let's do the web server flow, log into Salesforce. Cool, now we're back to the dashboard, and this is using the web server flow. You could see it pulled out all those accounts for us, and this is called web server flow. Cool, there you go. So we learned quite a few things. We learned how to use the JSforce library, how to handle callbacks for the web server flow, and how to set up the connected app. Hope you liked this video. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Any questions, leave them down in the comments below. Cheers, bye for now.